Welcome to Now in the 90s, where we look at the game releases of 30 years ago today. This week, one of Mario's biggest spin-offs arrives, a gorgeous shooter on the SNES, and one of Mad Magazine's most iconic segments gets a video game adaptation. I am your host, Jared, and today is September 2nd, 1992. Some good games create copycat clones. Truly great games create all new genres. Released on September 1st, 1992, was Super Mario Kart.
Let's go racing! It's Super Mario Kart Funny Car Madness! Only on Super NES! Turn the track into a giant mud pit! Or burn rubber on ice, wood, or asphalt! Mix it up with the big boys! See Bowser and his Bigfoot-dropping truck! See Yoshi's go-kart really go! Mushrooms, banana peels, turtle shells! Dynamite! Check your rear view and make a neat test! Or go into battle mode and ruin his day! 2 speeds! Fast and way too fast! It's 2-player fun on the split screen! Only for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System! Now when you're playing with power, super power!
Super Mario Kart was a massive departure for Mario. He's done sports, he's done art, but racing? Bah! Get out of here! Yet that's exactly what he did. Mario Kart uses the SNES Mode 7 graphics to its fullest by having Mario and his friends race around several Mario-themed tracks. The biggest innovation that Mario Kart provided was the ability to drive over item boxes, allowing you to use a randomly selected Mario-themed item to help yourself or hinder your opponents. Mushrooms that give you a speed boost, Koopa shells that make your opponent spin out, invincibility stars, and perhaps, oddly the most iconic, the banana peel. But also, lightning bolts, yes. Blue shells, no, didn't exist yet. It also features several playable characters from the Mario universe, which shouldn't be overlooked. For only the second time since Super Mario Bros. 2, Peach and Toad are playable. This is the first time you can play as Bowser in any game. And this reintroduces Donkey Kong Jr., who has been absent in the West since 1986. Development began when Nintendo was satisfied with how F-Zero turned out, but wanted to take it one step further. 2-player simultaneous racing. It was designed from day one to have some kind of 2-player split screen mode. In fact, this is likely why that even in single player, you're still only using half the screen. The other half is a map, of course, or with the push of a button, a rear view mirror lets you see who's behind you, which on a technical level, this was incredibly impressive at the time, as was the actual 2-player racing mode. It's also notable for having tough computer opponents. For one, they all have their own special items that they can use, and most of them you can't. As a kid, I would hit Peach's mushrooms on purpose because I thought shrinking down small was really funny. Also notable, the computer opponents were so difficult because they straight up cheat. The rubber banding AI is apparent. This allows them to suddenly catch up to you even when they were way behind. This also means that they have infinite items and don't need to race over item blocks themselves. And secretly off screen, they'll drive straight through items and obstacles to keep them in the race. This game is way harder than any of us remember it being. Of course, what made Mario Kart such a staple for so many people who had an SNES was the multiplayer mode. Racing together in the different Grand Prix was both competitive and cooperative. You wanted to work together to stop the computers from winning so you could move on to the next race, but you didn't want to let your little brother or friend beat you because that would be shameful. And once those frustrations grew to a head, you took it out into the amazing battle mode. This changed racing games as we knew it. Now there was a way to face off against a friend, but your objective was not to reach the finish line the fastest, it was kill him. Right around 4 large open room battle arenas, grab those items and hit the other player 3 times to win. This battle mode was incredible. This kept our attention and got more playtime than the actual race modes ever did. Super Mario Kart was loved from day one. It reviewed incredibly well from all magazine outlets. Nintendo Power issue 41 was dedicated solely to it and reviewed it with an average score of a 4.3 out of 5, which is surprisingly restrained for Nintendo Power. As to its legacy, just take a look around. Its first sequel, Mario Kart 64, skyrocketed the franchise as a pillar to any new hardware Nintendo would release. Every major Nintendo platform would get its own Mario Kart to this day, with the Nintendo Switch getting Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Originally a complete port of the Wii U game, but already starting this year, it is actively getting new courses thanks to new DLC. Super Mario Kart was so successful, it created the racing subgenre of the kart racer. Many other companies tried their hand at mascot racing, often in go-karts and getting some kind of weaponry through item boxes. Sonic Drift, Crash Nitro Kart, Atari Karts, Konami Crazy Racers, Star Wars Super Bombad Racing. Mario Kart sold millions. It became a player's choice game, sold well over 8 million copies, and in the top-selling Super Nintendo games of all time, it ranks at number 4. Also released this week in 1992 is Axelay for the Super Nintendo. Axelay was developed by Konami and is another kick-ass shoot-'em-up. It's both a side-scrolling shooter and a vertical shooter, using the Mode 7 graphics to do some visually neat things to make it seem like you're flying to the horizon. There's also some impressively awesome bosses to fight that look just spectacular. Rather than collecting power-ups, your ship has 3 different weapons that you can swap between. Get shot, however, and the selected weapon gets destroyed. This means you can take 3 shots before you die, or if you fly into something, you instantly blow up. There's a little strategy there in what weapon you want to use and what you would be fine with losing. This was also Konami in the SNES era, which means the music in the game is just fantastic. Axelay was developed at Konami by a small group of developers who would eventually leave the company. Those developers would make their own studio called Treasure and would go on to make titles such as Gunstar Heroes, Mischief Makers, and Ikaruga. Seriously, I feel like Axelay is one of those really good SNES games that gets constantly overlooked by more well-known titles. It should really be up there right alongside Gradius 3 and Aero Fighters. It's that good. Thankfully, reviewers at the time noticed as well. GamePro magazine rated it with an average score of a 4.75 out of 5. They especially loved the graphics and sound quality, and the fact that there's basically no slowdown in the entire game. And for something completely different, released this week in 1992, was Spy vs. Spy for the Nintendo Game Boy. Spy vs. Spy is a comic series featured in Mad Magazine beginning in issue number 60 in 1961 and is still going today. It was about 2 spies, one dressed in white and the other dressed in black, getting into cartoon-like violent shenanigans, leaving booby traps for each other in a comedic fashion. Evidently, they were popular enough to get their own video games. The Game Boy version is a puzzle versus game of sorts. Playing as either spy, you run around searching item boxes to acquire traps and placing them throughout each level. Should the other spy search where a trap is placed, they'll take damage. Or if that isn't your style, you can also run up and just punch the crap out of them. The goal is to find the special briefcase of secret documents and then escape the level before the other spy can. Dying isn't game over, as rather it delays you for a very long time, giving the other spy a huge time advantage. It is an exercise in frustration. It really isn't the most fun game in the world, mostly because your own traps can damage you, and I sure am not remembering where I put all those things. Also, every time you place a trap, you have to wait as the spy does their signature snickering laughter animation. If you've played Spy vs. Spy on the NES, it's very similar, only this game has them on an island. I still don't like it. Reviews of the game weren't great either. Nintendo Power themselves basically said the idea was cool, but execution lacking, and got a score of a 3.1 out of 5. At least if you don't feel like suffering alone, it did have 2-player link cable support. And with the other releases this week, let's throw it over to Editor Dylan.
The third and final SNES game that released this week was Wheel of Fortune, featuring a very slow Vanna White. Alright Vanna, what are you trying to show me? That's just inappropriate. Let's try to keep this professional, okay, Vanna? The NES had WWF WrestleMania Steel Cage Challenge. Here's a recap of the match. The Undertaker kicks Macho Man Randy Savage 26 times in the groin. Mr. Taker then body slams Mr. Man before running directly into the cage, knocking himself out cold. Randy leaves to go get a Slim Jim. The game opens with the LJN logo. Moving on. The Sega Genesis had NHLPA Hockey 93. If you'll indulge me a moment, I have wanted to try this since August 2001. That is when I received the 100th issue of Game Informer, which contained the top 100 games of all time, according to the readers. This game made it to the top 20, beating games like Street Fighter II, The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, and hell, even Mario Kart didn't crack the top 30. So is it any good? It's okay. It's not really my thing. The Atari Lynx had Steel Talons, which is an extremely impressive 3D flight sim for a handheld console. Helicopter combat is Alright, but you start out flying through rings and it only slightly plays better than Superman 64, which leaves us with a grand total of 7 games released on these 5 consoles this week in 1992. Truly, I am not worthy of Hockey 93's brilliance. I guess I'll just have to live with my inferior tasting games like Donkey Kong Country 2. Back to Jared in the Collector's Corner.
Thank you, Dylan. Here in the Collector's Corner, being such a huge seller, Mario Kart is relatively cheap with millions of copies available. A loose cartridge is about $30, and with the box and manual together, it's around $110. The biggest value gainer this week is Axelay. As an obscure underground hit, it's quite valuable. It goes for just over $90, and with the box and manual, it nears $250. Spy vs. Spy for a Game Boy game is fairly pricey. While loose is less than $25, complete is nearly $150. Those Game Boy boxes are hard to find, I tell ya. And that's it for today. Next week, we got a dinosaur game and a pair of titles from Hudson Soft. I'm your host, Jared, and this was Now in the 90s. Thank you so much for watching Now in the 90s. Please like the video and leave a comment down below and subscribe if you aren't already a subscriber. And if you already are, thank you so much for watching this every single Friday. One of my favorite things about doing this show is learning things about games that I already own. I've actually had Axelay since like 2002 or so, but I had no idea it's worth as much as it is now.